Awesome. Welcome all. Areas of focus work group, March 25th or 26th if you're Jane. It's sometime in March. I'm confident enough to say that. Cool. So pretty much one of the last things we had talked about was I had made up a formula and we didn't quite like how it was. So I went and relooked at it, talked to Lee, talked to Ilya, talked to a couple different people for ideas. I think I've come up with a slightly better formula that'll help us out. Under the task check-in, or the discussion, I put a link directly to the new area and then tried to separate it to make it clear it's a new conversation. But I'm also going to share my screen just to make it easier for us to follow along.
Did Wei Ming connect with you at all, Jason?
Yeah, I talked with him as well to kind of see what he was looking into. And
cool.
We basically came to the same conclusion of, we're both trying to solve a problem that feels unsolvable.
Nice, cool.
It's kind of the fun of trying to determine what does it take to solve a ticket. What I ended up kind of doing is using the metrics. I made this new formula, which uses the total number of replies that we sent in the past month, the number of days, working days that we have in a month, and the baseline, and then I made a new one called weight, and this was solely to make the equation kind of work out where 1 is a technical ticket and 2 is a non-technical ticket. And I've shown examples of what these look like here. So like CI/CD there was 1,049 replies. I'm saying there's 20 working days in a month. The actual statistical average for a year is 22, but I don't want to have to deal with it. That's just weird. Most days have 20. And then because CI/CD is technical, it's 5 replies needed per day and then 1 for the wait. Here's LNR, which is 1425 replies, 20 days, and then 5 times 2 is 10. This kind of gives us a new number. This here is giving us we need this many people kind of number. I don't really quite like that, but it can be broken down into percentages. That's basically saying use this number, take the number of your team, figure out the percentage from that. What this kind of equates down to is using our averages, or what we've had statistically, kind of where we're looking at in the past and where we are not quite right now, but like as of February, we can't use now because March isn't over, so we don't know those numbers yet. I suppose we could use it if we adjusted the working days to say how many working days in March, and it should equate to basically the same thing. But what this kind of gives us is a percentage of how much of the team should be focused in these various areas. You can see ones like security incident. We get maybe like 10 of those tickets a month. They're very rare. When they come, there tends to be a good number. Like there tends to be like 10 of them instantly, and then they're pretty much gone. So we actually only need what equates to 0.2 of an agent, or 0.26% of our team. And the reason for that is it's non-technical. Those are often handled with macros. If the 0.2 of an agent sent 10 replies a day, we're done. Like it'll kill every one of those tickets and we don't have to worry about them. But then you can jump to something like, I'll just use instant management. Okay, so we need about 26.9% of the team. That's because there's a lot of those tickets. That would equate currently with our current team numbers to about 20.59 agents sending 5 replies a day. Using this, it kind of adds up to, as of current, about 76. We'll call it 77 because there's no such thing as half a person. About 77 agents, which gives us about a 10 agent gap, which is decent for our PTO or working projects and stuff like that. It also has some baselines that when I mentioned this to when I mentioned the LNR, 10 replies a day to the people working the LNR queue, they laughed at me because they're like, yeah, we send more than that. I'm like, cool. This equation's basically saying this is kind of our bare minimum. So I feel like this gives us a little more wiggle room. It also gives us percentages of the team. So as we grow, we're not, having to say, it's this much of an agent. I just put that number there for raw calculation to kind of help me out make sure that the end number wasn't, 88 people and be like, okay, well then we have a problem. I also feel like the bar of 5 replies a day for technical and 10 for non-technical is a pretty low bar, at least in my opinion. I looked at some numbers from people, and we have a good majority of people hitting above that. So I don't think that's too much to really for us to expect. And then looking at this equation, there's basically 3 ways I see to edit the numbers. One's if we ask for more replies per day, that would mean we need less agents, but I also feel like that's going to boost stress on an agent a lot, especially if we get those too high. I mean, we could easily say, Cynthia, send 100 replies a day. Yeah, that'll probably knock out a view, but that's stressful on Cynthia. We don't want to do that. I also saw where we could decrease the number of replies per day, but the problem with that is if we're sending less replies, we would technically need more agents to still hit the numbers we're hitting now. And then the other one, which is the really hard one to achieve, but the ultimate one we want to, is to decrease the number of replies needed to solve tickets. By doing that, we actually need less agents. So that'd be the great thing to aim for, but that's also one of those things that's like, right, that's a lofty ideal that we really want to achieve, but it's not something we can just put on paper and say, yeah, we're going to do this month. We have to try different things, try different concepts out.
But that latter one, though, Jason, does fit into what we're trying to bring in as a KPI around reducing open time, customer wait time, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like
right.
That's why we should strive for it.
Yeah. So that fits well. The other thing I was thinking is you mentioned when we did a rough staffing model, we took a percentage of time. So we actually used 22 days. And like you, finance pushed it to 20 days, but we used adjusted like 75% utilization, 80% utilization, that type of thing. So that took into account some training, some days off, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Which, from the model you showed, looks pretty close, right? We've got 87 folks. This model says 76. So I think the adjustment is really around the replies and I expect that the replies you've kind of established has been taken based on data across the team and some semblance of average or median or whatever, right? So if that's what it takes to solve tickets, that's what we should be looking at, right? What does it take? So I mean, it seems, and I like the breakdown by area of focus as well. So you can kind of help define how many people we need in any particular region. And so anyhow, I mean, looks really good to me.
Yeah, I think what I've got here is more reflective of the staffing model we've kind of always used. Lee helped me out with that of like, here's how we've done staffing. I'm like, okay, interesting. I'm going to try to use some of that in what I'm doing. It's based on, this is how many replies we're needing to solve all these tickets historically, or average, because obviously more tickets means, but in theory, the number of replies has stayed, I want to say constant, but it has fluctuated slightly, normally fluctuating down, which is good. We want to see that fluctuating down. But I think what we've got here is a little better representation. It's also one of those things of, yeah, this is crazy math brain, Jason, and not everyone's going to respond to, look, here's the math and the numbers. I think it's also important that we be ready to explain, okay, here's why we have the numbers. It's to justify this concept and to make sure we're not about to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Well, yeah, I think some of the assumptions are based on data that's historic, right? Mm-hmm. So we've taken data from what it's actually taken to solve tickets and technical situation, et cetera, et cetera. So if you state in the assumptions, then and nobody really argues with the assumptions, it's difficult to argue with the results.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I know Lee is pretty intimate with the model we've been using, but it really is fairly simple in that it only takes, originally it only takes tickets created, right? Then we got into some wait time aspects, which associates to some extent in replies, but it's been just tickets created. You've taken it down to more granular level so that we're actually taking a little bit more or a lot more effort into ticket work, right? And to some extent it validates what we've been hiring to, but it also gives us that area of focus perspective that we can, in various regions, make sure we've got coverage based on the top 30, 50, whatever percent of bigger areas.
Yeah, no. When you're seeing those numbers, that's not per region. That's all of us in a day. So theoretically, that does mean like, oh, we need 10 agents for CI/CD. Theoretically, we could have APAC be all 10 of those agents. We really wouldn't want to do that because SLA times are going to suffer if we do it like that. But
but it's another assumption, right? It's another assumption that we don't have regional differences in how customers use the product. Right. We make an assumption that customers globally use the product the same on average.
That's not an assumption. I pulled the areas of the areas based on each region and assigned them to this is the percent this region encounters, and give or take a percentage point, they were all pretty much the same. So unilaterally, we are seeing based on our our data. Yeah, customers use GitLab like customers use GitLab, whether it's AMER, APAC, or EMEA. Like
makes sense, right?
Yeah, which makes sense to me. It's like, right, you're not going to only see geo customers in AMER. You're going to see them everywhere. So I think what we've got here is a good kind of starting point. It also, what I like about this is the way to make this look better, to make it where we need less agents is right. We make it so we need less replies, which could mean figuring out automation to help solve some of that. It could mean just finding out how to help agents solve tickets with less replies, even if it's, hey, take the extra 5 minutes to check your stuff, check your reply, make sure you've got everything answered. Down to, let's figure out tooling that you need to kind of build this. I think by separating out the team, by separating out the areas of focus, we kind of are able to get more granular on, okay, so we see that 26% is instance management. Okay, why are there so many tickets for that? Whereas right now we're looking at a huge pool of tickets and saying, why is there so many tickets? Infinity number of reasons. It's really hard to discern when you just have a giant bucket of tickets.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it helps pinpoint the things we talk about in helping engineers troubleshoot better, right? Or find the answers better within the product. And if you're focused in on the areas that are taking the top percentage of replies and effort, then you're keying in on how you can be much more impactful on areas and not spreading across everything to try and be provide a universal tool for every type of area.
Cool. Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I ran these numbers by Tom. He's like, yeah, that kind of actually, or by Tom Atkins, and he's like, that's kind of what I expected. I'm like, yeah, honestly, I think when you start thinking about this is kind of what you expect to see. You expect to see it like, right, there's a way to calculate how many agents we need. And the only thing I fear, and I fear this based on our historical attempts, this sets kind of a baseline of we expect 5 replies per day from you focusing on this area, or however it is split across when you're doing multiple areas. And I fear that sometimes the team sees that as a very negative, just because they see it as individualized metrics, whereas that's really not what we're trying to achieve here. What we're trying to achieve here is making it so you're less stressed and can focus on an area that you are A, actively interested in learning, or B, are have mastery in, and these tickets are nothing to you anyway. But I do think like wording and communication is going to be very important when we get ready to make this issue, because it's very easy to look at the numbers I've crunched and look at it like, oh, look, Jason's just trying to put individualized metrics on us. So like it's one caveat I want to express of, it's my fear that we communicate this wrong and it's seen as not as a benefit for the team, but as us trying to micromanage.
Well, I think that's a valid concern, but I think we've dealt with it in the past of, what we try to do is model what we need, not measure people by that model. Right. So in the past, we used a certain number of tickets per day, and that generated a certain number of tickets per month. And we knew people were blowing that out in certain areas and others, but we weren't measuring people on those we were analyzing how effective our staffing model was to the need we had, right? And so it really does come down to, based on data that's historic and have been, you've been pulling together, this is what supports the model, and this is what we go off and try to allocate per area of focus.
I think,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go.
I think Tom brought this up last time too. I think for the purposes, at least for areas of focus, because we're not talking necessarily about staffing model and the number of engineers we should have in support. I think that's one of the reasons why I think when we were talking about this table and the data is to focus, for the purposes of area focus, to focus more on the percentage in terms of, okay, this is how many we have right now in terms of people per region. And then in each region, we should have a certain percentage of those people kind of focused in these different areas, rather than even talking about like, I mean, certainly I think using the number of replies and the number and trying to calculate the number of replies needed and number of agents or whatever is good as a model for creating those percentages. But I think for the purposes, for our purposes in talking about, okay, well, let's grab those percentages, grab the number of people that we have per region and take a look. If we, based on people's current expertise, this is the kind of percentage of coverage that we have right now and whether that's enough, right? You're muted.
Yes, I am. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's why I like that you and Tom pushed me towards focus on the percent, not on the number of agents. I think that was a good move to do. And I'm glad I did it that way, because I think this works out a lot better. I've got the raw agent numbers in there just for the sake of saying, assuming we use this right now, this is kind of what we're looking at, just for the sake of seeing how those percentages translate to something viable for us to use. But I mean, it's really just like this percentage of the team. But yeah, I think what we've got here is a pretty good, like, this is a decent enough equation that I can figure out kind of how to get into Explore, probably with Ilya's help, so that we can have something like this, which becomes a dashboard, which is pretty easy for us to check into and say, right, as long as we're seeing either the numbers are pretty much the same, or, oh, look, CI/CD just jumped up like 10 percentage points, what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. I think it'll keep us pretty much on a good track to have this work fluidly. Cool. If we're all happy with that, that was like the big thing for me to try to figure out over the past 2 weeks, was trying to make that equation not look terrible.
Well, it can look as terrible as it needs to be, as long as it's right.
To be fair, I started thinking about, like, if I took the logarithmic and I was like, wait, no, stop, just stop. Like, I really started looking, I'm like, oh, I could take the log of the standard deviation. I'm like, no, just stop. Don't do this. Just stop what you're doing. There's no way you're going to present to a team an equation that has the word log in it, and people will turn their brain off. They're like, just no.
Oh no, they'll just go look for the log.
That's true.
We just care about results, Jason. You can use whatever math formula you want to get there.
It's very true. Very true. But I didn't want to have to explain logarithmic, like, standard deviation to people. Like,
It's a math minor. I'd understand.
Right, but are you going to want to explain that to somebody who doesn't? Because I don't want to do that. That was a hard topic for me to master in school. I don't want to explain that to anybody.
I think the thing is too, when we're messaging this to people, and excuse my very deep voice, it's as much about giving them the reassurance that there's some science and some data behind this, And the option is there if you want to see the maths behind it, rather than going, here's all the maths to prove that we've done it. I don't even think that's necessary. It's good that we can go, absolutely, if you are really concerned about it. Because I think the other thing to remember with the support engineers is that their perception of what they're doing can be quite different. Like L&R, I've had a look at several of the people doing L&R. The reality is, at most, the average they're doing is 13 responses a day, so it's not that much above 10, but they're also doing a bunch of internal tickets, so for them it feels like a truckload more. And to be fair, there is one or two people who are doing double that, but because they're doing internal tickets, which is incorporated in these stats by virtue of the fact that they're doing these right now plus internal tickets, so that is incorporated. It's just not numeric, if you know what I mean. It's not something that we've specifically gone and added in there directly, but it will feel to them like, oh, of course I'm doing more than 10 a day. It's like, yeah, but that's figured in. Am I making sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why, like, I mentioned this to like someone like Donique. She laughed at me when I was like, yeah, 10 replies a day. To like L&R people, that's gonna be a joke.
And yet if you look at Donique's actual ticket responses, she's doing less than 10 a day of actual Zendesk tickets, but she'll be doing lots of internal stuff as well. So that's why her perception is, oh, that's laughable. But yeah, the data it speaks different stories.
Yeah. Cool. So I think the other two main topics to address are the ones Cynthia kind of typed into the questions, which is who's going to be the DRI on doing this quarterly review for this. I'm more than willing to volunteer for that, or we can have a rotation, or we can just do who wants to actually look at the data and figure this out. Do y'all have a preference on how we would tackle that? Like, I don't mind being the one in charge of it for a while until this is all fleshed out and it's part of our normal process, and then we can figure out how to disperse it amongst managers or SEs or whoever it is wants to play that game. I think having it in an Explore dashboard will make it where it's not too much of a chore to do. But I will also say probably having Zendesk access to be able to see who's in which group and all that will probably be helpful in doing the review.
Well, we'll have that in the support YAML at some point.
Basically, the day we go live, I'm going to make sure that's all in the support YAML. So like, yeah, it will be there. It's just someone who is familiar with utilizing a YAML file to and like Explore to do all this will probably be easier for them. But I could also see someone who's like, I'm weak in both those areas and want to get better, possibly volunteering so they can see how this is done. I also think if we detail exactly how to do it, it takes a lot of the work out of it.
Yeah, I think what might be best is like either yourself or you and another manager do it at least the first time, which will be like, if we implement next quarter, the review will be Q3 is the first time we'll do it. And then so that you can at least kind of flesh out the process, like even if we write something now, we're not going to know like how well written that process is until you actually go through it the first time. So I think definitely for the time being, even if you're not the person to do it, if you're the DRI to make sure it gets done, I think would be really good, and it would actually be good to pull in one of the other managers, maybe one of the ones that are part of the working group, to actually go through the process the first time with you, again, flesh out the process and whatever else. And then, yeah, after that, it could be rotational and could be just volunteer basis. And yeah, until we figure out like a specific way to do that, I think it would make sense that support ops manager, which is, you know, obviously you, would at least be the DRI, again, just to make sure it gets done, not necessarily that you would do all the work.
I agree with that, and I think that to make it easier, especially around time zones, I can do it with Jason initially, and then probably for this next round, I could do it with Jane. So it's not Jason all the time. And then it will give us the time to, find which gaps might be for when Jason is not there all the time situations. And then we can work on a rotation after that. I think that will work. And I'm more than happy to help there.
That sounds good to me. Is there any opposition to that concept? Cool. The next one is, how do we enforce the idea that tickets need to be filed properly? Wow, Cynthia's asking the hard question. To summarize what that means, how do we enforce that people really need to update the ticket metadata every time they work a ticket? And honestly, I think this points back to the triage concept of like, we need to be triaging tickets properly, making sure they're in the right form, making sure they have all the right metadata filled. This is actually a pretty consistent problem ops hits, because what happens is someone doesn't do it and the next person doesn't do it and the next person doesn't do it. And inevitably somebody goes, why is this all messed up? And I'm like, because no one's done it. Like, if it doesn't just magically happen. I do think doing as much magic as possible to get as much of that automated as we can is helpful, but there are going to be parts of this that just, they're going to require human eyes. I think honestly, this comes down to a communication thing, maybe even looking at our current workflows to make sure that they strengthen the concept of the ticket really needs to be as accurate as possible, not only for the case of areas of focus, but also for Zendesk automations, other people looking at the ticket, metrics, potentially hiring. You'd hate to, like, an example I've used is like, you'd hate to have a manager tell you, oh, we only need 2 L&R people because the metadata says that that's what we need. So it's really important. I think honestly, this is just going to be a communication re-emphasis of, hey, the tickets are our single source of truth for customer, for like, our support information. We really need to re-emphasize and strengthen that we have to have that data correct. Especially since part of our workflow does say, look at past tickets. Well, if past tickets aren't accurate, then you're actually just perpetuating false information.
I think there's 2 aspects to that. I think one, I don't think there's a strong message on that in onboarding. Like on when people are first learning and when they're eager to absorb all the new things about how to do this at GitLab, there's not a huge emphasis on metadata and tickets. And so then that's one aspect of it, is making sure it's there as people start. But then we also need to do, like we did as we rolled out .com emergencies, we had to do a refresher. We did a refresher module for people to go, right, you need to do this training module. Now, it wouldn't be a training module because it's not a big enough message for that, but we need to get through all of the existing people to go, let's add this as a, it's one of the priorities you need to do. I've done it with like a couple of people in one-on-ones where I've gone, actually, you need to establish personal workflows where when you work on tickets, there's a few fundamental things you do. You make sure it's got an org, you make sure that the form is correct. And, so that message is not ingrained in people. So I think it is going to be a matter of working out how best to get that to the current the current group of people who are working tickets, because they're also the ones that are training others and encouraging them and honing, driving that message home.
Yeah. I definitely think it's like part of like automating, with problem types, it's very difficult just from like words that people type in to determine what type of problem it really is. And I mean, we sometimes work on tickets where initially it looks like it's filed in the right place, but then, as you dig into it more, you realize, oh, it's actually a problem with this, and you actually end up having to change the problem type later, which I think is fine. What I've noticed is that a lot of our customers don't file it properly, which is the reality. But then, that you have these tickets that are, have obviously been responded by, support engineers, and they're just not filed properly. And if we're resourcing and looking at training and all this other stuff based on these numbers, then it's definitely important that we get it right. Jane, I don't want to spend actually too much time on this. I wonder if we should just create an issue. I don't know if there's anyone in particular in the group who wants to take this on, or if there's anyone that you can think of that is potentially already doing similar work that would want to take this on. If there's any ideas, please voice them. Otherwise, I'm happy to create, I think I might actually create 2 issues, one specifically on improving our documentation and onboarding training around this piece, and then another one to discuss how best to communicate and make sure that all of the existing engineers like know this and have it emphasized to them.
I think a big part of helping communicate this is it will really help their own workflows to do this. I get pretty frequent questions of, why did this automation just fire 5 replies into a ticket? I'm like, why was it 5 replies in before we associated an organization? Like, that's why it did that. And that's because we've built things under this is what we're supposed to do. Right. Things act really weird when we go against what we're supposed to do. And then when the question is, well, why did it do that? Because we never assumed a situation where we get that far into a 2FA ticket without associating an org, and then for some reason have already sent the challenges, which was a case I had brought up to me today. And I'm like, wait, so we've already done the challenges and we're on verifying them. They're like, yes. I'm like, why are you just now associating them though? That's really, like, I don't know what to do with that. Like, I don't know how to tell Zendesk to be good on that part, because it's like, that's not supposed to happen at all. Yeah, I think like it'll really help in the emphasis of like, this makes Zendesk work better for you. We build stuff based on good data. Unfortunately, as we have seen in the past, not all data is good. Sometimes data is bad and it causes problems. But I do think like data integrity is a big part of this. And I think if we can really get people aligned on that, and I think like Jane and Cynthia said, tackling at both the onboarding and the current SE level will really help with this. I would volunteer to make the issue, but I do honestly feel like I've brought this up and made issues in the past about this, so I might have beaten this into the ground pretty bad. So it might actually be good for someone else to vocalize this one.
See, I think part of it is around how we message it too. Like if we could come up with a really succinct 5-minute recorded message about what and why, that for EMEA and APAC, we could actually play at our team meeting. And then we know that, you know, at least 90% of the team members in APAC and EMEA have seen it. I don't know how we do that in AIMA, knowing that there isn't a collective team meeting, but having that 5-minute video that gives the message, we know everyone's got the same message. It's really hard to make sure that everyone's reading and comprehending a written issue. So I'm just suggesting we pivot a wee bit and go, let's attack it a slightly different way. What are you smirking about, Jason?
I just got a really kind of dorky idea, which is, you know, the Sarah McLachlan videos about the animals? So instead of that, it's like every 5 minutes an automation runs when you don't expect it to. And I don't know why it's funny, but I just like a picture of Zendesk crying came into my head, and I'm like, that would be pretty funny. Yeah, I think something short and sweet and to the point that we can easily play for the teams would be useful. How to disseminate that in a mare is a good question. I've tried team meetings in the past. I think a mare is too big for a full team meeting. They don't go as well as, like, I've attended APAC's meeting. Those are awesome. But that's not how like the AMER one goes.
Yeah, I've attended APAC and EMEA, and it's totally different from AMER. I've done it async before. So one of the ways that we could do it is have just a checklist of people and then have them check it off when they watch the video. And then like even for APAC and EMEA, we could do that and then just if they watched it during the meeting, then they can check it off right away. Great. And if they didn't, for some reason, couldn't attend the meeting, then they can check it off later, right? So people can do it async. That's one way to do it. The other way is to, we could put it in the support we can review, and then either have an issue where people are checking out their names, or do what Tom A did one day, which is to have a survey where people click on it, and then that gives us a list of who actually watched it, or acknowledged that they watched it and read it. I think an issue with checkboxes would be more transparent. And so there are different ways I think we could do it, but I will open an issue to start the discussion. I do want to put out there that we'll want a DRI for each of the issues.
I specifically didn't suggest support week in review because of Tom's survey. You wouldn't have seen, Cynthia, but it turns out the results were 28% of people actually clicked on that. And I know a lot of those people would have been managers. So I have spoken to others who said, oh, I did read it, but I must have skim read that part. So yeah, I'm just conscious that we actually have another challenge there, unrelated, that we need to try and, yeah, I'm doing a little bit of an advertising program for support week in review at the moment. So.
I mean, I'm sure we all remember those tests that are like, read all these instructions and then blah, blah, blah. And like the last instruction is like, just put your name on the paper and sit there. Do not do anything above. And as cute as those were when I was little, I'm an adult now. If I got one of those things handed to me, I'd be like, I don't have time for this. And I'd just like throw it away. I'd be like, no. Yeah, I like the idea. I'm more than willing to be the DRI and the communication part of it, since I'm sure the video that we make I'll probably assist with, since showing things under the Zendesk hood might help emphasize the problem of like, here's how you set up a trigger. There's all these options. It gets really complicated really quickly. Yeah, I think, and I'm pretty sure someone's currently working on touching on the onboarding part. I want to say it's Wei Ming or Ronnie. So Ronnie, would you want to be the DRI on like kind of looking over the onboarding stuff with Cynthia to figure out what needs to be revamped to strengthen make the metadata great again kind of thing?
Actually, there is a working with tickets item. I think we can just put it in there as part of that area. But yeah, sure, I can do that. No problem.
Awesome.
I already created the issue. Too late, Brady.
I know you did. I knew.
Well, cool. Can you link it into the doc for me, since you're that efficient? But yeah, honestly, I think those are our big hurdles to kind of overcome right now. There's the SOS self-managed knowledge gap, but I think part of that is like we're already kind of tackling that with what some of the other managers are doing. And part of the like workflow pages revamp is also helping on that. Part of what I like about the update-a-thon issue I made is I've had people be like, I didn't know some of these pages exist. I'm like, but now you do, which is awesome. Because that was my response when I went through the entire thing was, I didn't even know some of these pages existed. Yeah, I think that's kind of our big hurdle. The other one is going to be a question I want to pose, and I want you all to kind of think about, and we'll discuss when we get back, which is for implementing this. Do we go whole hog and do all the areas at once, or do we pick some of them and slowly add the new ones in as we go? And
I think it's worth starting with.
I want you to think about it and maybe perhaps talk to some members of your team about the concept or something, talk to others. And the reason for this is there's a couple things to think about. One, no one bucket should be too big that it becomes overwhelming. Two, part of this might include having to actually coalesce self-managed and SOS into one. And I fear doing whole hog means a lot of changes happening really quickly, and the team's going to push back understandably because that's a lot to take in.
I do also want to, I think it would be helpful to whether it's just in a spreadsheet, we can always move it to like the support site later, but as a first iteration, just take the percentages of the different areas, plop in the number of people we have per region, and then kind of get an idea of like how many people per region for each region would we be looking at for each area. Just to kind of give everyone a sense of like, well, you know, how many, like, where would we be with that now based on like the list of expertise. I think part of it is going, because like, at least in my view of things, if for the most part, even if like some adjustment might need to be done, if for the most part we already actually have the people we need in the different areas, then it's going to be just, it's going to be a Zendesk view change, but that's kind of it, right? Like you're not really going to be changing what people work on, and you're not going to be drastically changing how they work necessarily, because we're still going to have the SLA views, we're still going to have the FRT views, right? This is just giving them extra views to kind of focus on their expertise areas. And so if we already have generally the numbers we need, it's going to be a lot less change than we're talking, even just talking about it, right? It's going to seem like a lot less change than talking about, oh, we need to potentially train X number of people in this area to make sure that we have coverage or whatever. So I think that would be helpful. The other is that we talked about before about potentially just having specific people at least trial this sort of thing. And we talked about, do we want to do it like a couple areas of focus, or do we want to do specific people? And like personally, I think it would be easier to do specific people rather than specific areas of focus, but partly just for communication and feedback and all of that, like having just like a small group to trial it, I think would be like, personally, I think that would be the better direction, but I'd also be interested to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, that's the reason I said it's kind of a homework question thought, is because I don't feel like there's a right or wrong answer to this. I feel like it's just a matter of discussing all the various aspects of it, and then all of us kind of deciding, this is where we're going to move forward on. These are the things we talked about. Here's the pros, cons, and all this stuff. It's part of our communication when we kind of implement this. Because I feel like if we just come out with, oh, we're doing some of them, somebody's going to go, why? Our answer shouldn't be, no. That's often an answer I've had for why we've done something in the past, mostly because I don't know. And that's a legitimate answer sometimes. But for this one, we probably shouldn't have the legitimate answer of I don't know. Cool. The other thing I see to be done, DST has happened for, I think, everyone at this point, which means this meeting is now exceptionally early. Not for everyone. Who hasn't it happened for yet?
Australia.
When does
This one-
y'all's DST start?
So Australia and New Zealand switches at Easter weekend, so next weekend. So at the moment it's already an hour earlier. Like this used to be 10 a.m. my time. This week it's 9 a.m. The next instance is actually 8 a.m. and seriously,
Okay.
I don't do 8 a.m.
So I'm thinking, could we move this forward an hour? That way it's your 9 a.m. so it's not as early for you, but I feel like still not too late for the rest of us.
I can make, I mean, I've made it work today. I'll make it work again. I just have to deal with my slightly stuttery sentences.
I'm okay with an hour. Even 2 would be okay with me, but I know the others
Same
are
here.
more east.
Okay, well, let's do it that way then. Could we move this forward 2 hours?
What about an hour and a half? Hour and a half works for me.
Yeah, could we move this forward an hour and a half and it not cause significant problems for anybody?
I'm looking at Tao.
Yeah, it's fine with me. I would suggest you shorten it too and just have more concise discussions over half hour. I think we're still an hour on the schedule, right?
Yeah,
15
I'm
minutes.
thinking move this forward an hour and a half, shorten it to 30 minutes, because we're now at the point where we're pretty much just going to start working out of issues, which point we get to start acting async out of this.
Yeah, Thursdays are typically a hella busy day for me, but the one conflict might be Eric's one-on-one, which shifts day to day. So we'll see. Make what I can.
Thank you.
No problem at all. I'll get that all done after I upload, or after I start the upload for the YouTube video for this recording, because that takes at least 30 minutes for YouTube to do all its weird processing stuff anyway. Cool. We still have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything y'all want to touch on?
We work on short meeting schedules. We have 1 minute left.
I think this is technically an hour-long meeting, though.
Okay,
well,
you know how it works. 30 minutes meetings are 25 minutes. Our meetings are actually 50 minutes, so that you have a bathroom bio break, whatever you need before your next meeting. So
that's fair. All right, so we're out of time.
We're out of time. Oh, but before we go, are you going to create the spreadsheet that I suggested?
To calculate based on our current values, what we would have
for each region, and then the percentages. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to clear that up.
I might have to reach out to you to help me figure out how some skill sets translate into various categories.
It's fine. Yeah.
But yes, I will have that made by our next 30-minute meeting. And honestly, that I don't think it'll be a discussion point as much as it'll be like, here it is, look at it.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. Cool. Well, then I will let you all go. Thanks for attending. Great seeing all of you. Have a great week, rest of your month, whatever it is to you.
Fun moving.
Time is weird. Hell yeah. Okay. Bye, y'all.
Cool.